Have you ever wondered, with regards to risk in business, about what it means, what bankruptcy means? And you hear the term bankruptcy and liquidation and going into receivership. And sometimes, you might know something about it, you might not. What I want to share with you is going to share some insights about what this means, and so you can have really good understanding of it and make sure that you can reduce any risk for this happening to you and your business in the future. Bankruptcy is often really misunderstood in business, how it works, why it can happen, and what I want to be able to do. This is the first video. I'm going to create a 4-part video series on this particular subject. I've had a lot of people inquire about this and ask questions around what bankruptcy means. So I'm going to create a 4-part video series around this, and so that way I'll take you through the sort of things to understand about bankruptcy, what it can mean for you and your business, how to get yourself set up so you can avoid it and you can protect yourself and your assets. That's what's going to happen in this. So if you want to be kept informed as I release these videos, just subscribe or like this, and that way you'll be in the loop as this content gets created and produced. So what makes me qualified to talk about bankruptcy? The reality is that gotten to a point now where I've been successful in business. I have a number of businesses, got a lot of things going on. But in the past, over the last 3 decades, I've actually been bankrupt twice. And when it happens the first time, they're not a good thing. It's not a good thing to happen to yourself or to anyone that you know. But it is something that it's worth understanding and worth getting some information around so that you can understand how to avoid this potential risk in business. It's something that often no one thinks about it. No one goes, I'm going to go into business, so potentially I could end up bankrupt. But it's one of the major risk areas to think about when you kick off your business. And so what I'd like to do, firstly, is sort of define it a little bit and talk about what it means so that you can firstly have a bit of an understanding around the whole idea of bankruptcy, what it means for you. So in the past events that I've happened, where I've been bankrupt, hasn't been pleasant. It's not a pleasant experience. Typically you can lose, and which I have done, you lose assets, you lose control over your assets, and it can be quite demoralizing, and it can be really, your whole self-esteem can just be hit really hard with it. In essence, I reflect back on it, it was something that I probably needed to go through. I had to learn some lessons, which I ended up learning, and then adapting my approach to the way I deal with business, and looking at how I can reduce the risk for that taking place again. And what happens in business, there's little events that take place, and you may not know at that point in time that you're increasing the likelihood or the risk in this particular area. And that's what I really want to share with you in this particular video, is just so you have an understanding of that and what can potentially cause bankruptcy for you and cause some issues like administration or receivership for your business. Now, the thing to understand in relation to bankruptcy, it varies, and the laws relating to it vary from country to country. I'm from Australia, and so Australia has specific laws around bankruptcy, how it works, how long you're bankrupt for, all those sorts of things. Depending on the country you're on, what I'd really encourage you to do if you want to do a bit of a study on it, do some research, is look at what it means in your own country. You may know someone who's been bankrupt before, someone in business or a colleague or a friend or a family member. It's really worth having a bit of a conversation with them, because then you can get a bit of an understanding of what that looked like for them. So in essence, what bankruptcy is typically is when someone has money that they owe to other people, to a third party, it can be an individual or a company, and you can't pay that money. It's a choice. You can have a choice whether you decide to say, look, I can't repay all these debts. It's just too overwhelming. I'm never going to be able to get there. And you can have a choice of saying, look, I'm going to spend the next 10 or 15 years trying to pay these debts off. That can be a choice, but that can really hold you back. Or you can say, look, I've tried the best I can't go forward anymore, and so I'm going to choose to go down the bankruptcy path, which means in essence that those debts and that you have can get cleared, so you end up with a bit of a clean slate. The downside of that process is that if you have any assets or anything that you've built up, that goes into that pot to pay out the people that you owe money to. And you lose control effectively of your assets, and there's certain constraints that will come into play during your bankruptcy time. So for example, in Australia, you can't really travel overseas without permission. You can't be a director of a company when you're bankrupt. You can't get a credit card or any form of credit when you're bankrupt, because it obviously trips up all the credit rating type stuff. And so bankruptcy is typically a mechanism to have a bit of a reset. So, mistakes have happened, you've done the best you can, whether it's in business or in your personal life, and it hasn't worked. And so there's two options. You just say, well, I'm going to spend time paying everyone back. And if that's possible, that can be a choice that you decide to do. Or you might go, look, I really want to reset so I can head off on a path again without carrying all this baggage with me. The other way that bankruptcy can occur is when, for example, you might have guaranteed a loan to either a bank or another institution, and that might be a personal loan or a business that you operate. And as part of that, you've guarantored it, which means if the company can't pay that, then you will be personally responsible for repaying that. And that was the case when the two times I've been bankrupt is when I did guarantors, personal guarantees for company loans, fairly large or multi-million-dollar loans. And so in that instance, when the company gets into a situation where it can't pay those loans back, what the bank will do, or anyone, whether it's a creditor, they will go, okay, the company can't pay it, so we're going to come back to you as an individual because you've personally guaranteed those loans and ask you for it. And if you have the money, then you pay it. If you don't have the money, then the bank will naturally go through a process and saying, well, we're just going to bankrupt you to find out what assets you do have. Because you might go back to the bank and say, I don't really have any assets, I don't have any money. They don't really know that. You could be hiding assets somewhere, you might have money or property around the place. So one way for them to be sure as to if that's the case is by taking you through a bankruptcy process. So that's almost like being forced down that line. In the times when I've been bankrupt before, it related to offering personal guarantees to the major banks for multi-million-dollar loans to companies that I was a director of. That's what happened, and that's how I ended up in a bankruptcy situation. So I think understanding that, they're the trigger points, and so you can choose. You can say, look, I don't think I can deal with the situation. It's overwhelming. It might be affecting your mental health or creating stress in your family, and you just want to clear the slate. So you can choose to say, look, I'm going to go down the bankruptcy path. And then you can organise that yourself, and you can get someone to assist you with that process. Sometimes it's unavoidable, and someone that you owe money to, they may not believe. You might say, look, I don't really have any money. They might not believe that. And if that's the case, then they're going to take a process, put you into a process where they find out for sure if you've got any assets or you owe anything by driving you down the bankruptcy path. So that's what bankruptcy is. It's a similar, so in the personal context, it's called bankruptcy. When you look at a company, the same sort of scenario, the same situation is a company might be in administration. So when a company goes into administration, that's what we call it in Australia, it's where a company can't pay its debts, so you can appoint an administrator who then takes control of the company, looks at what assets it has, look at who you owe money, and works out how people can get money from what's owed, what they owe the company. So in essence, for a bankruptcy is typically a term which relates to individuals. In companies, it's normally administration or receivership or liquidation. But you often hear in America, for example, they talk about bankruptcy companies becoming bankrupt, but it refers to those sort of terminologies. It's important to understand that. As I mentioned before at the start, it varies. It definitely varies country by country. So depending on where you're at, it's worth doing some research around that and understanding what it looks like to be bankrupt. It's not a pleasant thing. I didn't have any real understanding of it. Obviously, I didn't set out to go into business to become bankrupt. Events that took place in my various businesses, which some of it were in our control, some of it were actually outside our control, and there was no real option. The banks were going to take us down that path. It wasn't just myself, it was other directors. It's a pretty tough place to be. I really wouldn't recommend it, but I sort of learnt a lot by going through that process, and it taught me a lot about how to organise my business, as it is a potential risk, because obviously as you move through life, whether you're working for someone else, whether you're building your own business, you're making profits, you're saving money, you're building these assets up. When you lose that and you effectively start again, it's really hard, because you might have spent 10 years of your life or 15 years of your life sort of building assets up and building your own business up. You may have property, and then all of a sudden this gets cleaned off and you're starting again. And that's not good. It's not a good place to be. But it was really the lessons from those effectively failures, things that didn't work, sort of enabled me to understand why they happened. Why did they happen? What took place? And a lot of it was a lot related to how I operated the business, how much debt I had in the business, the people that were running the business along with me. There's a whole range of factors that contributed to those outcomes. And so I think going forward, it's important to really be clear that it is a risk. It's a risk. It's a very real risk in business. If you're in business, it's a risky thing to be involved in. And the more you can understand those risks, the better placed you will be to manage them, and also be able to set up things and avoid making certain decisions or doing particular things that will increase that risk to you and your assets, and people that are around you, your family, personal assets as well. That's what I wanted to talk about in this particular one. I'd really encourage you to do some research around the way that bankruptcy works in your own location, in your own country, so you can understand it. Often there are other options to going bankrupt. Just recently someone was talking to me about that and saying, look, I think I need to go bankrupt. I've got debts I can't repay. There are other options to it, and one of those options is to actually sort of map out who you owe money to. Who do you owe money to? And can you actually negotiate a bit of a deal? So for example, you might have a whole bunch of people that you owe money to, and it comes to, let's pick a number, $50,000. But in essence, you can actually put together about $5,000 or $10,000. Let's say $10,000. So you might go back to the people that you owe money to and say, look, I can't give you the full amount, but for every dollar I owe you, I can give you 20 cents. And they may look at that and go, well, it's not a bad offer. We're unlikely to get anything at the other end. They may accept that. It could be something that you can do. So I wouldn't encourage you to necessarily use bankruptcy as a process unless you've explored and exhausted the other paths, because it does make it harder to continue to operate a business, to gain credit, and that can follow you and impact on your ability to get things done in a financial space up to 3, 4, 5 years. So there are other options, and you can explore those other options if you're in that situation. It is a tough place to be when you owe people money and you can't pay them back, and sometimes it may actually be the solution, saying, look, I can't, it's overwhelming, it's affecting my mental health, it's creating all sorts of problems, and then you can actually get some advice as to whether this may be something that might be appropriate for you, depending on your situation. So look, that's the first part I wanted to do. I just really wanted to talk a little bit about the concept, what it means, and what I'll do in the next videos, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can organize your business so that you can reduce or eliminate and organize your personal assets and your structures so that they're more protected and reduce your risk. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch up with you in the next video. Ciao for now. Thanks for listening. As you know, we grow organically. It's really people like yourself that enable us to get the word out. If you like what you hear, please give us a rating, leave a good comment, and share this with your friends. Thank you.